Rich Diviney is a retired Navy SEAL commander, a best selling author, and an expert in leadership and human performance. In a military career spanning 20 years, Rich completed more than 13 overseas deployments, 11 of which were to Iraq and Afghanistan. Since retiring from the Navy, Rich has shared his knowledge and expertise as a speaker, facilitator, and consultant. He is the founder and CEO of the Attributes Inc. and speaks and consults on leadership, high performing teams, assessment and selection, and optimal performance. In January 2021, Rich published his first book, The Attributes 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. Welcome, Rich, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Rich, I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple guys who have served in elite units of the military, as well as a few guys from law enforcement, FBI, and DEA agents. And I'm always curious about what caused their lives to go in that direction. And I think part of it is it's so different from how most of us live our lives. Tell us about your background growing up, and at what point did you decide you wanted to be a Navy SEAL?
Yeah, it is very different, and admittedly, I had no clue what Navy SEALs were. I grew up wanting to be a Navy pilot, and specifically fly jets. My twin brother and I both wanted to fly jets off of. Well, we wanted to fly jets, and then we realized that if you went into the Navy, you got to fly jets off of ships, which I mean, that's pretty cool. And this was before Top Gun, and Top Gun just solidified our our desires. But yeah, it wasn't until the first Gulf War in 1990. It was shortly after that that I happened upon a Newsweek article that was outlining the special operations forces of the different services, and so it outlined Marines and Green Berets and SEALs and Air Force CCTs and such. And I couldn't help but notice, I was like, these Navy SEAL guys, man, they seem to be everywhere. They do everything, sea, air, land, and specifically, I love the idea that they were kind of born from and of the water. And just being a water rat, I said, man, this seems pretty cool. And so I started reading books and ended up at Purdue in the NROTC unit there. And again, still hadn't really decided um, which direction to go, but ultimately said to myself, well, I know I can be a pilot, but I don't want to be a pilot and wonder if I could be a SEAL. So, so I decided to go for it. And fortunately, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I think most of our listeners and viewers have some perception in their mind about the SEALs, probably related either to BUDS training or Hell Week specifically, or maybe combat. And of course, most of that and all of it for most of us comes from television or from the movies when we,
Mhm.
see a platoon carrying like the biggest log we've ever seen, or a life raft or something like that. I know there's a lot more to it though. How does one actually become a Navy SEAL? And what does that process look like?
Well, you're right. The process is not it's not a lot like the TV and movies. What's interesting about that is when I joined up back in the mid '90s, there wasn't a lot of SEAL stuff out there. Very few people knew what SEALs were, and it was very interesting to watch the explosion in popularity as we went through the early 2000s, and to see this unit become so recognizable around the world. But ultimately, the process is and has been for the last 50 plus years a course called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition slash SEAL Training. And I say 50 years. It's been longer than that. I mean, the UDT's first predecessor to the SEALs first formed in World War II. The SEALs came about and were formed in the early 60s, and they were drawn from the UDT teams. But BUDS is a 6 month long course. It's held out in Coronado, California, San Diego area, and it's known as some of the toughest training in the world. 90%, roughly 90% attrition, so only about 10% make it through, and known in the fifth week of training for the infamous Hell Week, where Hell Week is, and that's where you get your most quitters. But you start out on a Sunday afternoon, and they run you basically until the following Friday, and you basically only get about 2 hours of sleep for the entire week, and you're doing, I mean, all the exercises imaginable, running with heavy boats in your head. You're wet, cold, and sandy for the whole time. That's when you get your most attrition. But But the phases are, first phase there's three phases of SEAL training. There's the first phase, which is, really, I mean, to put it bluntly, kick your butt phase. You get the most quitters during that first phase. Second phase, you start focusing on diving and all the diving skills, and then third phase, you focus on land warfare. So you learn all the shooting and some basic demolition and things like that. So and then you graduate, and at least nowadays, you go through a whole another 6 month course of specialized training before you go to your SEAL team, and then you begin to serve.
And so, as you said, the kick your butt phase, and I'm guessing that's not how it's described on Coronado Island, but or in and around San Diego. But of course, Hell Week is part of that phase. And from the Navy's standpoint, what's the purpose of buds, and specifically that week long grueling Hell Week?
Yeah, it's well, the purpose is interesting because, and it's something I had to really figure out, and part of what I tried to do in researching the work I was doing while I was still in the SEAL teams on attributes, and of course thinking about it in writing the book. But I kind of thought back when I was doing this research. I spent, in buds, you spend hundreds of hours running around with big, heavy boats in your head. You spend hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around with those things on your shoulder. You spend hours and hours freezing in the surf zone. And at the time, I had been on hundreds of combat missions overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. I'd been in thousands of training evolutions, and never on one of those did I carry a heavy boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole. So what you recognize is what they're doing to you in the SEAL training. It's not really training at all. They're not training you to do those skills of SEALs. They're putting you into these environments, these situations to see if you have what it takes to be a SEAL. And what it takes means those kind of innate, inherent qualities that allow you to operate in deep deficiency of sleep, deficiency of energy, maybe even deficiency of positivity. Right? Can you go down to zero or sub-zero and still operate, still perform? And that's what Buds is trying to tease out of candidates. And so it's different. It's really very much an attribute selection course versus a skills training course. Of course, I did, obviously in second and third phase, you do learn some skills, you learn some diving and some shooting, but most of the in-depth skills training doesn't happen until you're actually out of buds into the SEAL qualification course or even at a SEAL team. That's when you really learn the stuff and hone it down. Most of that initial stuff is all about teasing out those qualities and see if you have, quote, what it takes. And in this case, what it takes is the unique set of attributes that it takes to be a Navy SEAL.
And you mentioned the 90% attrition rate, and that's 90% of an already arguably elite team, right? There's an application process. I mean, you don't just sign up for the SEALs and get started, right? There is some selection process prior to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, the numbers always shift, and of course they shifted a great deal when the SEALs became quite popular. A lot, in other words, a lot more young men applied. But I mean, inevitably, at least certainly when I was going through, you can imagine probably about 1,000 to 1,500 or so folks applying per year. And out of that, well, maybe even more, maybe 2,000, 3,000 applying. Out of that, and I'm just being rough with the numbers. If you have about 5 classes per year, with about 150 candidates, so you're talking, about 700 or so people starting, and then of that, only 10% make it through. And so, and then the officer selections even more competitive. I think when I went through, from all of the ROTC units in the country, they only took 12 to start buds, just to go to buds, right? And then from that, who makes it through. So yeah, it's people talk about, and I think there's a lot of people who are fascinated with, and a lot of young men or even guys my age who wonder if they could do it. And I hear a lot, oh yeah, I thought about doing that, or I wish I could have done that, and that's all fine. But I always kind of say that the selection process starts with that decision, not even to try out. I mean, it starts there before you even get to the beaches of buds. But ultimately, you're talking about a whittling down process that's really quite intense.
Yeah. What was the hardest part about buds for you, and what is it that separates those who get through it from those who go up and ring that bell?
Well, I mean, if we had an answer to that second question, then then the buds compound, the center there would have saved millions of dollars trying to figure out what those specific things are. It's tough to narrow it down. I think ultimately, when I've done the attributes work, first of all, I'll say that, I mean, the toughest part of buds, and I guess it varies for everybody, but the cold is one of the worst parts, because you can't escape it. The misery of being sandy and wet, and just having to keep going, you can't escape, and so you just have a whole element of things going on with you throughout that course. I think the key quality for anybody to make it through that training is a heightened, uh, basically these heightened mental acuity attributes that I talk about in the book, the ability to compartmentalize in a way that allows you to block out everything that doesn't matter in the moment and focus only on one thing. And that one thing might be just get through the next 10 seconds, or that one thing might be just get to the next meal. And so the ability to do that, without the ability to do that, you cannot make it through. And so you wonder, okay, what is it that allows guys to get through? I mean, what in their background or their upbringing allowed them to get good at that type of compartmentalization? And that answer varies from guy to guy, depending on how they brought up, what sports they did, how what their upbringing was. But anybody who makes it through, those guys who do make it through, all have a really innate ability to compartmentalize extraordinarily effectively.
As a commanding officer, were you surprised by guys who made it who you didn't think would make it through buds, and guys who didn't make it that you thought for sure they would? I mean, I guess probably as time goes on, you stopped wondering about that because there are so many variables. But
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, you stop being surprised almost as soon as you go through it, because you start the class, and and even in my class there were some real studs, and it was quite often that physical studs, Division 1 athletes or whatever these guys were, oftentimes were the first to quit, and you're left there wondering, well, how the heck did I get through? And so you begin to very quickly not judge on the visible, which makes and made the work that I began to do with the attributes so much more interesting to me, because the attributes are all about what's not visible. But yeah, I stopped being surprised, and the worst part for, when I say worst part for me, but the hardest part for me was when I'd have guys who were interested in going to SEAL training, and I'd often help them with their process. And the best you can do is help them the best you can to get there. And you say, okay, once you're there, it's all on you. And to be honest with you, I mean, the success rate is mixed results. Some guys made it through, a lot of guys didn't. And I think every one of us SEALs who's mentored someone to go to SEAL training, you basically do your best you can, but ultimately you're not sure
yeah, I
because
was
the
going to say there's no way to predict that, is there? I mean, you can't look at somebody's resume or what sports they played or whether they were a star athlete or had academic excellence or any of that, because you can sort of throw all that out the window when you're putting somebody through a week of sleep deprivation and cold and
yeah.
everything else that goes into Hell Week.
Yeah, and Hell Week is really just, I mean, just that's just a fifth week of a 6 month course. There's something that's called, and this is a very real phenomenon. I heard about it before I went through Hell Week, but it's called post Hell Week depression. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know this until I got through Hell Week and I got hit with post Hell Week depression. And post Hell Week depression basically is, you've just been through Hell Week, you've made it through one of the hardest weeks, in military training in the world, and you realize you still have 5 months of this stuff to go, and you're like, oh my god, because it doesn't let up. I mean, certainly you're not, after Hell Week, you're not carrying many more boats on your head. You're not doing a lot of the kind of kick your butt type stuff that they make you do that has no meaning. But they're still hard. It's still a very hard course, and so post Hell Week depression is real, because Hell Week is only the fifth week of a 6 month course. So
So the rest of the 6 months, is that more less physical, or is it still heavy physical training and
yeah,
then moving into a lot of the tactical training?
It's heavy physical training, but it's done in a way that begins to build you up. I would say everything up to and through Hell Week really kind of breaks you down. You're not getting much stronger during that first 5 weeks, and post Hell Week they begin to. It's very heavily physically focused, but it's done much more responsibly in the sense that now you're getting stronger and faster and better. As well as training. So it's designed to push you, but you're benefiting from it at the end of the day.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it must feel like such an accomplishment when SEAL training ends and you go through formal BUDS class graduation. You're joining an elite group, and you realize that as a U.S. Navy SEAL. But when you get that SEAL Trident pinned on your uniform, it's not the culmination of the experience, right? It's not like you're somebody's putting a gold medal around your neck at the Olympics. It's really, in some respects, just the beginning.
It certainly is, and the saying in the teams is that you earn your trident every day, and that is the absolute truth. You are there to continually earn your trident, and certainly it's not. I always say it's not as simple as buds when you get to the team. And buds is pretty easy. I mean, I say easy. It's pretty simple. It's either quit or don't quit. That's about it. Your only responsibility at buds is not to quit. That's about it. When you get into the more advanced training, when you get into the platoons and you start, doing the work, it's not. I mean, now you have to perform, and that's a big deal, and it matters. And so earn your trident every day is a mantra that every Navy SEAL carries. It's one of the reasons why when you leave the SEAL team, we're not like the Marine Corps in the sense that we say once a SEAL, always a SEAL. When you leave the SEAL teams, you're not a SEAL anymore, and it's fine. I mean, we say that with respect because we want to honor the guys who are still doing the job. But I am not a SEAL anymore. I'm a former SEAL, and I hold that time I served as a SEAL in very high regard, and it's on the shelf, and I honor it. But I don't do the job anymore. I'm not earning my trident anymore every day. To be a Navy SEAL, you have to earn your trident every single day, and that's the point. That's really what keeps the edge quite sharp.
And so that's the biggest part of the notion that you're not a SEAL anymore, is that you're not earning that
Right,
Trident
right.
pin on a
That's
daily
exactly right.
basis.
Yeah,
That's
and I would say
interesting.
you're a former SEAL.
Yeah.
You're not an active SEAL, but
Yeah. Um, it's interesting the timing of when you joined the Navy, because that was back in the 90s, I think 1996,
yeah.
so pre 9/11. What effect did 9/11 have on the U.S. military in general, and specifically on the SEAL teams? Because you were there 5 years. I mean, you had a good amount of experience under your belt. And then I won't say everything changed, but a lot changed.
A lot changed, and I think the military in quote peacetime is really centered around preparedness and exercises and thinking about different scenarios, and that's what life in the teams was before 9/11. It was all about you deploy for presence. We still deploy. I deployed all over the Middle East prior to 9/11, and so we were there for 6 months, just ready to go if something happened. You're training constantly. You're just kind of always at the ready. And I think what 9/11 did and what the war did was it just simply focused everything because now you were going and you knew exactly what you're getting into, and so the training became much more focused and precise. And I think in certainly certain skill sets we all became very very honed, but in other skill sets there was atrophy that went on. I mean, we did not a lot of water in Afghanistan or Iraq, and the SEALs are from the water, right? So a lot of the maritime elements you just didn't do as much anymore. So in many ways, the community atrophied in some of those skills and competencies, and the community has adjusted since the war has finished. The community has now refocused itself on some of those core elemental maritime proficiencies that the SEALs were born and bred. And so I would guarantee you that the SEALs today, right now, who are operating, are probably much better scuba divers or combat swimmers than I was, because they're focusing on that stuff. So, but the war really it focused you, and you kind of you the everybody became. Um, really centered, and to be quite honest, there were some folks that decided to get out because for them they didn't, once the reality hits of what you're about to do and the risk you're about to take, some guys were like, yeah, I'm not going to do this, I'm not ready for it. So that happened as well. So just interesting evolution holistically.
Yeah, and along those lines, it seems like the threat to democracy, if we can call it that, certainly hasn't waned since 9/11. And if anything, it seems like the tension today is higher than ever with current conflict in the Ukraine and tension increasing between the US and countries like Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. Rich, what factors remain constant through your military career? And how are things different if they were toward the end of your career? I mean, you had 20 years of experience in the military, which is a long time. And again, it was during a time of great conflict.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well,
Uh, yeah, I mean, it was very interesting, and I'm incredibly really grateful to have been able to experience it and learn what I did. I mean, grateful is a weird term to use because it was hard and we lost, so many, but you still try to pull out from those experiences the positives. I was an officer, so the evolution of an officer in the military to include the SEAL teams is one of constant. Um, I would call it. I would hope. Certainly for me was a kind of the aperture opening more and more, and so you're able to see things at a with a bigger at a bigger distance and from a higher point of view. And so for me personally, I began to, as we went through the GWAT, and I started the GWAT as kind of a young lieutenant right there with the guys kind of in it, and then slowly kind of rose up the ranks to be in charge of task forces and things like that. You begin to understand and look at the conflict in different ways. And I think one of the biggest questions that someone in a position of leadership asks or should be asking is, okay, what are those things that we're doing that need to be done, and what are those things that we're doing that don't need to be done? In other words, you become much, and risk adverse is not the right word, become much more risk aware, and you begin to understand how to calculate risk in different ways. And some officers see this and some don't. I had a few just fantastic mentors who I latched onto, and this was both Navy officers and Army officers, who were of the mind that said, I want to make sure that what we're doing has purpose. I don't necessarily care about volume. In other words, number of operations or whatever. I care about the purpose of each operation. So if I do 10 operations on a deployment and they're all meaningful, I'd rather do that than 100 operations that don't mean much, right? Whereas there are other senior leaders who really felt like volume was the way to go. I was on the first I was in the first corner where I felt like, I really wanted to make sure that what we were doing had purpose. And when I was sending guys out into the field of combat, it was for something that had value. And so I think that's really what I learned. I learned to really look at that very carefully, and understand the nature of war. I think most steady, even-minded military folks who've experienced war, and I'm talking about really experienced war, like been in it, are mostly pacifists
mm,
at that point, and not pacifists in the say that
com-
lovey-dovey, hippy-dippy, just pacifists in the sense that we all understand the horrors and the bad stuff that comes from war on both sides. It happens to the people who are experiencing it in whatever country it is, happens to the good guys, the bad guys. War is a bad thing, and I think those folks who go through it, who have stable psyches, understand that, and understand that war has to be very, very carefully considered before entering into it, because when you do, it's going to be hard. So that's, I think, what I learned.
so you have a greater appreciation for peace after having been through conflict.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I'd like to switch gears and ask you about teams. I know teams are critically important in military. They're a big part of the structure with the Navy, with SEALs. I live in southeastern Michigan, and I don't know if you're a football fan or not, but there was a coach here at the University of Michigan back in the early 80s named Bo Schembechler, and he gave a speech about the importance of the team. And he says, no player is more important than the team, no coach is more important than the team, the team, the team, the team. We all recognize team sports and the importance of teams on the playing field, but that really pales in comparison to the importance of teams on the battlefield, especially when we're talking about elite operators. Share your perspective on that. Why is the team critically important, and how does team building occur in the SEALs?
Yeah, I mean the team is critically important because there can be no team unless it's made up of humans, right? As you know, and so when I hear the importance of the team, I also hear the importance of each individual and each individual's ability to contribute to the team. The team is important because you have, if done correctly, a collection of individuals that bring unique capabilities that mesh together like a zipper. And so you create a unit that can now deal with an enormous amount of diversity and complexity and ambiguity because you have the ability to fall back on each other, support each other, step up when you need to step up. And so the team becomes necessary in that way, because especially in the military, by design, you're going into what the military defines as VUCA environments. VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The VUCA environment is what the military is designed to do, and to effectively perform in a VUCA environment, you need to have as much advantage as possible. And that advantage comes with team members who provide a myriad of different strengths to the equation and understand when it's their turn to step up and lead and when it's their turn to follow. And this is this idea of what I call in the book dynamic subordination, where the team understands that issues and problems and challenges can come from any angle at any moment, and when one does, the person who is the closest to the problem and the most competent immediately steps up and takes charge or takes lead. And then everybody follows. It's a dynamic swap between leader and follower. I also call it alpha swapping, where that alpha position changes, it hops around. So that even though I was the officer in charge of almost every operation I was on, it didn't mean I was always being supported. In fact, it usually meant the opposite. I was supporting the snipers here, or the breachers there, or the assaulters here, and then it kind of went in that circle. So it looks like a lot more like a flock of birds and or a school of fish. And so team building is, I mean, its foundational element of team building is trust and trust building. I mean, you can't have any team without that foundational element, trust. That trust is forged. Is forged through diversity and challenge, and on the beaches of buds, and then forged again as a platoon when you're going through training. It's forged by the humility that the environment demands, right? People often say, "Hey, well, how do you maintain humility when you're a Navy SEAL?" Right? Well, it's very easy because the ocean will kill you if you don't pay attention. I don't care how good of a swimmer you are, whatever you think. If you turn your back on the ocean, it will kill you. As will the air at 22,000 feet jumping out of an airplane, or climbing a mountain or whatever. And so, and on the battlefield, a 9-year-old kid with an AK-47 in Somalia, pulled the trigger, bullet goes the right direction. It'll kill a 35-year-old well-trained Navy SEAL in an instant. So that type of humility is in your face all the time, and so with that, you're constantly leaning on each other, trusting each other, and part of that is also a vulnerability that the team members express to each other, and it's without this stigma of vulnerability meaning just show your weaknesses. Vulnerability means I'm showing you my strengths and my weaknesses. I'm wearing it all on my sleeve because I need you to understand when I'm going to be leaning on you and when you can lean on me. And so that type of transparency is fully expressed in everything you do in these environments, and that builds this unit, if done correctly, of just incredible trust and efficiency and high performance.
Well, and that's obviously woven throughout the fabric of everything that you do in SEAL training. I remember reading about a couple things that I thought were interesting, and maybe you can share some additional, just really simple things that are done to build that trust that you were talking about, to build teams. One is that you don't seem to have the same officer deference that other branches of the military have, or so you're calling each other by your first name. Something as simple as the Trident pins. I think they used to be officers had a different color than
Mhm.
non-officers, and that was changed. What are some other things that are just really simple things? And I'm asking that because um, not all of us are going to be SEALs, obviously, or part of an elite operator team like that. But we're all on teams, whether
Mhm.
we're talking about sports teams or teams in the office. And so maybe to ask the question a little differently, what are some things, some team building strategies that you learned in the SEALs that can be applied anywhere in life?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is, and it speaks to the example you made of kind of the familiarity and the first name and the lack of deference in many cases, amongst the officer and enlisted, as you wouldn't typically find in a normal military unit. And that is that the fact that in these type of, in a very very high performing team, um, hierarchy means nothing more than area of responsibility. That's all it means. It's because I'm the commander. That just means I'm in charge. I'm responsible for this set of things. Okay, and then the sniper is responsible for this set of things, and then the breacher is responsible for this set of things. And so you come to a team wearing your rank not as a position of power, but almost as a explanation of roles and responsibilities. My snipers would never in a million years ask me to step up and take the shot, right? And it's not because they know I'd miss; it's because they know it's their job to do it, right? My lead jumper would always step up and take the lead when we're jumping into an area, because that's his job to do. Just like I would never ask my enlisted guy to manage the entire target while the assault was going down, because that's my job to do. And so I think every team, if they want to be high performing, really high performing, and really effective at dealing with ambiguity and complexity, would benefit from taking the hierarchy, and instead of using that as positions of power and deference, use that as positions or explanations of roles and responsibilities. And that really begins to clarify people's ability to say, "Hey, now it's my turn to step up, and now it's my turn to recede." And I think leaders especially can do this. Again, the culture will follow whatever example the leader promotes. But I always say one of the three most important words a leader can say to members of team are "I need you." Because what that does is that tells that team member, "Hey, what you do here matters. It has purpose, and I can't do what you do. You are a valuable member of this team, and we need you to be that way." And that immediately puts ownership on that person. And most people, they want that ownership, and they'll step up to that ownership, right? And so when a leader can say, "I need you," uh, it's a very visceral, visible signal that, hey, you matter. Every single person matters. And one of my favorite CEOs used to say this, to the command. Obviously everybody sees the Navy SEALs and they see the guys with the guns and going to do the missions and the cool stuff, but the Navy SEALs are supported by all these other entities: the intelligence, logistics, supply, the comptroller people, right? Everybody who supports the effort to get the SEALs to where they need to go. And my CEO used to, this particular CEO used to get in front of the command and say, "Listen, um, your importance to the mission has nothing to do with your proximity to the X, and the X means the target, right? That's the actual, maybe the building that you're going to go rescue the person, or get the bad guy. That's the X, right? So essentially, it's like, I don't, just because you're back at base camp or even back in CONUS working the money, it doesn't mean you're less important to this mission. You are absolutely necessary." And I think that was a really great way to kind of encompass the importance of every single person to this larger effort.
I think everything you've said makes sense. And I wonder though, eh, how does ego not get in the way of all that? And I
Well,
think of sports teams, or again in the office, or
yeah.
on the battlefield, and maybe especially on the battlefield. When you're talking about Navy SEALs, you're talking about really elite performers who are at the top of their game. They're well trained. I would think they'd be even more prone to ego getting in the way. And yet, I certainly understand the danger of that happening. How do you navigate through that, or how does that not happen?
Yeah, I
It
think.
just seems
Well,
so
let me.
natural.
I'm going to caveat this answer by saying that there are a few Navy SEALs who are very arrogant. Okay, it's not so, that it happens, right? But what I've never seen are SEALs that are arrogant out on the battlefield, and I think the reason is, in fact, I know the reason is because the environment doesn't allow you to be. I mean, you cannot, like I said, you can't have ego with the ocean. You can't have ego with bullets flying down range. The environment humbles you. The environment makes you, and the stakes are higher. I just be honest. I mean, the athlete's stakes are not high. And we say, yeah, the Super Bowl matters or the pennant matters. It doesn't. It matters, yes, but no one's going to die if they lose, right? And worse off, you're not going to get your buddy killed if you do the wrong thing. That's the I'll say the Navy SEALs. It's really the military member's worst nightmare is that you will do something that gets your buddy killed. You'd rather die yourself than do something that gets your buddy killed. And that in of itself is humbling. That stems and stamps out all ego. So I would say the most ego I've seen in the SEALs or in any military unit. Now again, those that have actually been to combat, because a lot of people don't understand that the majority of the people in the military never see combat, and again, doesn't devalue their importance to the mission. But the people who are actually in the front lines, you typically don't see that ego there because the environment doesn't allow it. And I would imagine if it's ever showed up, they probably it probably hasn't worked out well.
Yeah, makes sense. Rich, I'm always fascinated and amazed by elite performance, however that's manifested. So let's segue now into the attributes, and really appreciate all that you've shared, all of your background. And I definitely want to dig into the book because there's a lot of great material. One aspect of the book I really appreciate is how you bridge elite performance of special operators in the military with optimal performance of civilians in all areas of life. Tell us about the work you were doing as a CO, a commanding officer, that led to your discovery of the hidden drivers of optimal performance, the attributes.
Absolutely. So I was put in charge of the selection, assessment, and training for one of our very very specialized SEAL commands. And at this particular command, we would take a lot of the best candidates who applied from all the rest of the SEAL teams. They'd come to our command, and we'd put them through our own selection. And we get about a 50% attrition, which is okay because any assessment program implies attrition. But what was not okay was that we, as a command, were unable to effectively articulate why guys were not making it. Okay, so guys wouldn't make it, and the rote answer would be, well, it couldn't shoot very well, couldn't do this. It was all kind of this very skills based. And so again, when I took over, my CEO said, "Hey, Rich, we need you to articulate this because it's not going well in terms of our ability to explain it." And so I really sat back and I looked back at what we did at Buds, and I said, "Okay, wait a second. If I've never carried a boat on my head in all these missions, then they're not looking for skills when it comes to Buds, and nor are we in this selection." That's really when I began to separate skills and attributes, and really found that they get conflated and confused all the time, but they're inherently not the same thing. And just to kind of break it down for the audience, skills are not inherent to our nature. We're not born with the ability to ride a bike or shoot a gun or drive a car, and we're trained and taught to do those things. And skills also direct our behavior in known and specific environment. They tell us how and when to do something. Here's how and when to ride a bike or throw a ball or shoot a gun. And then because they're very visible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. This is why we get seduced by skills when we're looking at teams or building teams or even hiring people, because you can put them on resumes. You can put scores and stats around them. But what skills don't tell us is how we're going to show up when the environment becomes uncertain and stressful and challenging and unknown. Because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult to apply a known skill. This is when we lean on our attributes. And attributes are, in other unlike skills, attributes are inherent to our nature. In other words, we're all born with levels of patience, situation awareness, adaptability. You can develop these things over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in small children. Attributes don't direct our behavior; they inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to a situation. So, in other words, my son's levels of perseverance and resilience informed how he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then because they're hidden in the background, they're very hard to see and therefore hard to measure and assess. They become the most visible during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress. So what I was able to kind of figure out, or I guess articulate, it was already out there, was the fact that these hidden drivers, these attributes, are driving our performance all the time, and in many ways that are beyond skill. And so, if we start looking at attributes, we start looking at these innate qualities, we start piecing together what actually drives performance and what dictates individuals and teams that will be able to continue to perform even when things go south and sideways. And so that's the work I did. And then as I got out of the Navy and began to talk to businesses about teams, I would get very often people saying, "Hey, Rich, we're putting together, or we put together this dream team. We got the best marketer, best legal person, best graphics designer, best. We put together the team. The team was great for the first week or two, but then when things went sideways, the team turned toxic. They all began infighting, and just everything went downhill." And I said, "Well, it's because you were looking at the wrong things when you put together a team. If you assemble dream teams based on skill, you're not going to get the right qualities, the attributes that you need for teams that actually last and can perform through environments when those skills no longer matter." And so what I did is I tried to take the work that I did in the SEAL teams. I tried to ubiquitize it and talk about, okay, what does this mean for everybody, all of us as humans, when it comes to optimally performing through life, and what are those common most important attributes for that type of performance. And that's what I came up with, the 25 attributes that I read about in the book.
Yeah, you made the distinction between skills and attributes, which I think is an important distinction. And another distinction you make early in the book is between peak performance and optimal performance, which I thought was really interesting. When we're trying to figure out ways to perform at our absolute best, whatever that looks like, why do we want to strive for optimal performance rather than peak performance? And what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, I was the biggest difference is that one is only a small part of the other. Peak performance is an apex, and there's only one place to go from an apex, and that's down. And so when we talk about optimal performance, instead of focusing on just peak, because peak is just like it's like the fad now. Everybody wants to peak everything, peak there, peak this, peak that, peak everywhere they are. And it's unrealistic. Optimal performance means I'm going to do the very best I can in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment, right? So the best in the moment could be peak, right? It could look like flow states and everything's clicking, but my best in the moment also could be, hey, I'm freezing in the surf zone, and all I got is the ability to just count to 10 and not quit, right? And I'm just slugging it out, and it's dirty and it's ugly and it's gritty and it's grimy and it's painful. That is also performance. It's optimal performance. I'm doing the best I can in the moment. And what my best looks like right now is pretty ugly. But optimal performance allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to reward ourselves and pat ourselves on the back, even when things are tough and ugly and hard and it doesn't look like peak. And it also allows us to understand appropriate energy management, right? I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store, and I can manage my energy in ways that are much more efficient. One of the big mythologies that you see in TVs and movies of SEALs is that, right before a mission, the guys are like rah rah hoo-yah, high fiving, everything's like high energy, and the fact is we'd be on helicopters on the way into combat and guys would be sleeping, all right, because the guys knew they didn't know how long that what was coming was going to last. They didn't know what was going to what when was this going to end. There was no answer to how long or what was going to be required up front. So I am not going to waste an ounce of my energy right now when I can be saving it. And so optimal performance allows us to understand proper energy management. It allows us to peak on demand, and then it allows us to relax and recover on demand as well, so that we're kind of always maintaining cognizance of kind of that battery load that we're going through in any given scenario.
It seems like there's an opportunity if we're telling people that we want them to perform optimally under the situation and recognizing that that might not be a peak state, that we give people a little bit of wiggle room for maybe less than optimal? How does that get measured, or what are
Yeah,
your
I mean,
thoughts on that? You know
I'm
what I
not
mean?
sure. Yeah, well, less than optimal, I guess, would be you're not doing the best you can. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, there are some people who might try to cut corners, but ultimately, I think most of us want to do the best we can in any environment. But sometimes it's just hard, and sometimes it's not going to look good. And I think as leaders, if we're both preaching and exemplifying this type of performance, then people will look at that and then model it. I mean, I always say leaders just need to model the behavior that you want to see more of. First, model it, right, and then reward it, right. So model the behavior you want to see more of, and then start rewarding the behavior you want to see more of. You add those two equations, and the folks who are supposed to be there will rise to the top, and people who aren't supposed to be there, they will usually self select to leave, and that's the best case scenario.
That makes sense. So you have 25 attributes, and you've also grouped those into 5 groups. Could you talk a little bit about that? We don't have time to cover all the attributes, but if you could just talk about how you came up with the 25, and why 25 versus 30 or 15, and then maybe a little bit too about the way that you've grouped those, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the 25, I basically took the 25 came from an original list I created when I was doing it for the SEAL teams for this specific SEAL command. And of course, the list I had for the SEAL command was 36. But as I kind of vetted it out and took out some very SEAL specific ones and kind of figured out what might be synonymous with others, it clumped to about 25, which admittedly is a nice even number to write on the title of a book, but it just turned out that way, right? But and honestly, the categories came to fruition while I was writing the book. I had not intended for them to clump into those categories, but as I was writing, they began to clump in these ways, which was really convenient and began to help me tell the story a little bit better. The categories are so there are 5 categories. The first category is grit, and grit really speaks to. A lot of people think grit as its own attribute, but grit is not its own thing. Grit is it's a combination of things combined and stewed and catalyzed to come up with a result of grit. And grits kind of can be described as our ability to kind of push through and persevere through these smaller, shorter term uh, goals and challenges, the short term, short duration stuff. And those attributes that make up grit are courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. And then mental acuity attributes, those are the attributes that describe how our brain processes the world. I kind of talked a little bit about compartmentalization. That's one of them. The first one is situational awareness. How much information are we taking in about our environment? There's some people who are very highly situation aware or highly vigilant. Navy SEALs typically are highly vigilant. We notice things about our environment, where there are other people who walk around kind of in la la land. They don't notice a lot. And there's no judgment there. It's just the way it is. So that's our levels of situational awareness. Compartmentalization, like I described, ability to kind of assess information, prioritize, and immediately focus in on what you need to focus in on. Task switching, the ability to hop between categories and context. How efficiently can I switch focus points? Because again, multitasking is a myth. Our conscious minds can only focus on one thing at a time. So how effectively and efficiently are we able to shift between focus points? And then learnability, how fast are we able to learn and metabolize the rest of the lessons around us? Then we have the drive attributes, which if grit speaks to the short-term challenges, drive speaks to those long-term, those endeavors that take a longer term time to pursue. What are those attributes that make up the driven person? And those are self-efficacy, open-mindedness, discipline, cunning, and then yes, narcissism, which I know is a pejorative term, but certainly a driver. We can get into that if we want to. The leadership attributes. So, what are the attributes that make great leaders? The thing about leadership that people understand is leadership and being a leader and being in charge are not the same thing. One is a noun and one is a verb. Anybody can be in charge. Anybody can self-designate. I'm in charge. You can't self-designate as a leader. You can't call yourself a leader. That's like calling yourself good-looking or funny. Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow. And if you call yourself a leader and you look back and there's no one following you, I got bad news for you, right? So people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, and they do so based on behaviors. And those behaviors stem from these attributes. And those attributes are empathy, um, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. And then finally, team ability. What are those attributes that make up a great teammate? You don't get to call yourself a great teammate either. Other people, your teammates, call you a great teammate, and they do so based on the way you behave. And those attributes are integrity, conscientiousness, humility, and humor. And so, and then I have a couple others that I talk about, which make up, those are the ones I described are only 22. I have three other ones that I describe as the others in the book, which we can get into if we want, but they don't kind of bin in the same categories. But those are the roughly the five categories of 25 attributes.
I appreciate you sharing that. Are certain attributes more important than others?
I would say for the longest time I said no, but then I was really pushed up against a wall in a couple of podcasts, and I had to really think about it. I would say if I were to define the most important attributes for humans as a species, is probably the grit attributes. And the reason why I say that is because if we as a human being, as human beings, don't have some semblance of those grit attributes, the courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience, we're going to have a rough go. So I would say probably those are the most important. I think the mental acuity are as well, but it's tough. I try not to judge them.
And so when you talk about the need for grit and the risk of not having that, are you talking about individually or collectively as a society?
I mean, I think a little bit of both, but I typically would start with the individual. Again, courage probably the most important one because courage is our ability to step into discomfort and challenge and fear, right? And courage is literally what has caused we as a species to go from cave dwellers to space explorers, right? And if we cannot step into discomfort effectively, if we have no ability to be courageous, then I mean, we're dead in the water. Perseverance is the ability to be courageous, kind of do it over and over again, and persevere through those things. Adaptability implies that as the world and the environment changes around you, inevitably, as you're discovering, as you're stepping into all this new stuff, you're able to adapt and shift and evolve really and change the way you need to. And then resilience is the ability to recover after all of it, bounce back, so you don't fall into a spiral. So I think that's probably why those are so important for an individual.
Yeah, I've always maintained that adaptability is I've said adaptability is a key success trait of the 21st century. So
Mhm.
obviously I've put that ahead of other things, but your book really helped me to appreciate that there are so many other things that maybe don't need to be, if we're using a scale of 1 to 10, don't need to be at a level 10, but certainly it makes sense to have those in terms of development of the attributes. I understand that we can identify with certain attributes and that we resonate with some more than others. You even have a great free assessment at theattributes.com, which I encourage our listeners and viewers to go to identify and provide insight into those attributes. How do we take all of that great information? So we've measured each of the attributes, each of the 25, and apply it to create optimal performance in our lives and also to help our teams perform optimally. So what do we do with all this great information?
Yeah. Well, first, it's to understand that you don't and cannot be high on. You don't want to and cannot probably be high on all of them. You don't need to be high on all of them. In fact, being high on any of them is probably a bad thing. Being too high on any of them, I think there's only a couple that I think being too high would be okay, and that's like resilience. And I'd have to think if there was one more I thought of, but other than that, if you think about being too adaptable is a bad thing. Being too courageous means you're fearless, and that's you're not assessing risk properly. So that's the first thing. Understand where you fall on these things, and then understand how that fits into the niche you're currently in. I always kind of think of ourselves as automobiles. We're all automobiles, but we're all different types. Some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, and some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment there because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it's good to lift your hood and figure out what kind of car you are, because you might be a Jeep that's been trying to run on a Ferrari track. And if you are, you're going to start to understand why there's been friction. And you can either say to yourself, okay, well, actually, I don't want to be a Ferrari track. I want to be on a Jeep track. I'm going to get over there. Or you say, well, I'm a Jeep, but I'm going to try my best to be on a Ferrari track. So you start to think about those attributes you may want to develop. To develop an attribute, you can't do it the same way as a skill. There's three things that have to be present. First, self-awareness, then self-motivation, and then a willingness and an ability to step deliberately into discomfort and stress to develop and tease that attribute, right? So if someone wants to develop patience, for example, they have to go find environments that test and tease their patience, whatever that looks like for them. It could be deliberately driving traffic. It could be go and stand in the longest line of the grocery store. I always say have kids, that'll develop your patience, right? But whatever that is for you, You have to go find that, and it has to be self-aware, self-motivated. I can't make you, for example, develop an attribute. I can teach you any skill, right? And in some cases, I could teach you without you even wanting to know. If you're on a computer enough, you'll eventually learn how to type. I mean, that's just the way it goes, right? So even skills can be taught at an unconscious level, but attributes have to be deliberately developed.
In your opinion, Rich, what's the single most important thing we can do to unlock our potential and help others do the same?
I would say introspection, introspection and self-awareness. It's a desire to understand what drives us, what's our makeup, be honest about our strengths and our weaknesses, and start to understand and capitalize on those. Develop the one or two things we might want to develop, but ultimately be very honest about our strengths and weaknesses, and go forth and prosper that way.
That's great. Rich, thank you, first of all, for your 20 years of service in the military. I know, I think in the US, and I'm certainly guilty sometimes of taking for granted the freedom that we have in our country. But I do realize, and I think people today, maybe more than ever in this lifetime, realize that that freedom comes at a cost. And we also realize the men and women who are paying the price, paying that tab. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. I know you're a former SEAL, but certainly want to credit you for that service, because not all of us do it, but we all get to benefit from the service of those people who do. And so thanks for that. And thanks for being on the show today. I really appreciate you sharing your background and helping us to make optimal performance the standard in our lives. I hope we have the opportunity to talk again soon. I think we could talk for hours about either SEALs or the attributes and lots more. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful discussion. And yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch. I've greatly enjoyed our chat. So thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with former Navy SEAL Commander Rich Diviney on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.